You're listening to episode 26, The Red Cross of Currencies of Let's Talk Bitcoin for July 23rd, 2013. Coming up on today's show, Roger Vere on Mt. Gox. Why aren't Bitcoin exchanges utilizing Bitcoin's transparency? New worse standards coming to a number generator near you. What's the point? I speak with Pele Brandgard from Nairobi, Kenya about the recently launched Cappucci wallet. Satoshi Dice takes the money and runs, and suddenly Bitcoin startups have a successful model to emulate. Bitcoin in Argentina, or how to train a population to understand they need cryptocurrency. Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show focused on the ideas, people, and projects building the new digital economy and the future of money. If you're brand new to Bitcoin and would like to learn more, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com/learn to be directed to the Bitcoin Education Project. My name is Adam B. Levine. I'm a writer and speaker who likes to talk about complicated topics in understandable terms. Joining me in our twice-weekly search for clarity, Andreas M. Antonopoulos is an expert in distributed systems and decentralized networks.
Hello.
Dr. Stephanie Murphy is a scientist and syndicated radio host.
Hi there.
Thanks for joining me again, guys. We're recording these a little bit further in advance than we usually do because, Stephanie, you and I are getting ready to go to the Inside Bitcoins conference in New York City on July 30th.
Yes, very exciting. We'll both be speaking there, Adam. We're going to have a meetup with our listeners, which we've recently updated as well.
We were going to have a meetup at EVR, which is Charlie Shrem of BitInstance. He's a part owner of essentially a bar.
It's in Manhattan, but it's not just any bar. It's a Bitcoin bar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was the plan. But actually, we've been talking with Jonathan Mohan of Bitcoin NYC, and he's put together a cocktail party that's going to be held at some sort of firm called Second Market. So we're moving the event to there. If you'd like to join us at that, you can check out the meetup. There's going to be a link in the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to see us at Inside Bitcoins, make sure to check out the meetup group where you can find a 20% discount code to attend the event.
I am so looking forward to seeing everybody.
The day after, actually, we're going to be recording a show there. And the day after, we're going to be doing lots of interviews with lots of random people that'll be kind of on that longer side, like the ones that I did at Bitcoin 2013, where they're, in the 30 to 50 minute range. And you really get a chance to kind of dig into the project with them. So I'm really excited about all the content that's going to be coming out of this. And I actually have a project that is a little bit tangential to what we do here, but is totally related to Bitcoin. It's going to be an open source project. I'm in the throes of it now, getting it all together, trying to get it ready. So looking forward to talking about that at the conference.
Aren't you seeking collaborators on that right now?
I am always seeking collaborators. Thank you, Stephanie. It's especially with these open source projects. This is going to be my first time actually pushing out something like this. So like I said, I'm really excited to see it, but that's enough about us. Let's jump right into the news today.
Well, guys, I saw an interesting video the other day, and I wanted to talk about it on the show because it ties in with something that we had covered just pretty recently. We had talked about some rumors about Mt. Gox and their potential problems with liquidity or problems with solvency. We had read some speculation that was on the Bitcoin Talk forum, and that was not the only place that this was being speculated about. I mean, there were rumors all over the internets. I don't think that one forum thread was very unique. A lot of people were thinking the same thing. And that was, of course, that, Mt. Gox issued this kind of weird, fishy statement about, well, we had some problems covering these withdrawals, but now we've reached a new partnership with a banking partner, and now we'll be able to do it, but we still have a backlog and we can't do it quite yet. So people were saying, okay, what the heck is going on here? Did they speculate with customer funds, as so many bankers have done in the past, and it's gotten them into big trouble? This video came out, and the video is Roger Vere, who's someone that I really, really like and really respect and really trust. I mean, this guy gave me my first Bitcoins. I mean, he's just done so much for Bitcoin. So he's a really well-respected guy, and has been just working tirelessly on behalf of promoting Bitcoin for the last couple of years. In this video, he is reading a very obviously pre-prepared statement into the camera saying,
I'm Roger Vere, longtime Bitcoin advocate and investor.
Today I'm at the Mt. Gox World Headquarters in Tokyo, Japan. I had a nice chat with Mt. Gox CEO Mark Karpeles about their current situation. He showed me multiple bank statements as well as letters from banks and lawyers. I'm sure that all the current withdrawal problems at Mt. Gox are being caused by the traditional banking system, not because of a lack of liquidity at Mt. Gox. The traditional banking partners that Mt. Gox needs to work with are not able to keep up with the demands of the growing Bitcoin economy. The dozens of people that make up the Mt. Gox team are hard at work establishing additional banking partners that eventually will make dealing with Mt. Gox easier for all their customers around the world. For now, I hope everyone will continue working on Bitcoin projects that will help make the world a better place.
He released this video statement and, people are kind of critiquing the delivery. It's pretty obvious that he's reading a statement, and I give him credit. It's hard to do that, right? It's hard to record something and make it sound really natural when you are reading a statement. But I guess the content of the message is something that I'm interested in. It's Roger, and he's saying that, he's seen Mt. Gox's finances and they look like they're on the up and up and everything's fine. Do we believe him? I guess that's the question. Do we believe him? And what's the purpose of sort of releasing a statement like this? Why hasn't Mt. Gox released a transparency report? And instead they're releasing this video. There's all kinds of questions. What did you guys think about this?
With transparency in mind here, I think we should disclose up front that Roger is a sponsor of Let's Talk Bitcoin. He's one of the primaries at Bitcoin Store and also blockchain.info. So just wanted to throw that out there that I'm not going to get too much into this, but we go out of our way to really separate content from sponsorships. That's why we have advertisements in the way that we do, where they're in such a very distinctly segmented format, separate from the rest of the content. And those are inserted after the fact. So we, again, the sponsorship from the perspective of our content has no impact, but it's important to me that we disclose that he is in fact a sponsor here.
Fair and balanced.
Or at least we tell you what we know and then you get to make up your mind for yourself. To the actual point, Mt. Gox has been so bad about communicating that this is clearly, to me, an attempt by Roger to try and help them. This is not him going in because necessarily he's very concerned. This is him going in because there's a problem here. And if it's real, then that's fine. If Mt. Gox is legitimately insolvent, if they're legitimately having these problems, we talked last week about fractional reserve and how potentially they could not actually have as much as they were saying, because technically, so long as not everybody takes it out at once, you don't actually need to have full reserves under a conventional banking situation. I mean, that's what this is the problem is that once those rumors start going, they feed on themselves and they feed on each other. The reality becomes difficult to differentiate from what the rumors are after a while. And to a certain extent, it doesn't even matter. That's the real lesson, I think, to take away from this message from Roger, is that even if the message itself is positive, if it is contrary to people's expectations, and it has even the slightest appearance of being anything other than of free will and legitimate, then there are going to be questions called on it. Because again, why is this happening is the kind of driving thing. What is the motivation for it?
Well, I don't know if you noticed, guys, but if you look carefully, you can see that he's blinking in Morse code. And
help me.
I think this is probably the best communication Mt. Gox has put out. And that's because, their main problem isn't that they're insolvent. The main problem is that they're incompetent in communication. So in the history of their incompetent communication and customer communication, this is the best thing they've ever done. As far as I know, Roger has no financial interests in Mt. Gox. He's seen as a relatively independent guy. He calls it like he sees it most of the time. And so I think that was a great endorsement. And, next time they should get the necessary technical gear so that when someone's reading from a teleprompter, they can actually look into the camera at the same time and they don't get that zombie stare look. But other than that, I think that was pretty well executed. I'm glad Roger did it, and it gives me a lot more confidence in their financials to have someone like Roger say it. Now, what I'd like to see is more of a policy going forward that has transparency as part of the DNA of the company so that you can see what's going on. This is a space where we have no regulators, and regulators mostly help the incumbents, but they do occasionally do some audits and force companies to also publish books. So it would be nice if the companies in this space did that voluntarily.
Again, we get back to that transparency thing. What should a Bitcoin-based business look like in terms of transparency? Because right now the norm as it stands is it's no different than any other type of company. You keep as much close to your vest as you can because it's a competitive disadvantage to be transparent in case the books aren't exactly what you'd like them to be. Unless you have something really great to show people, there's no actual reason to do it, and customers don't demand it yet.
If you're the leader in this space and you've got the volume and you don't do that, here's the price you pay. When a rumor like insolvency goes out and you have no books to back any information about what you're actually doing, and you're forced to do account closures and to do temporary freezes, then you lose business. Sure, they have no reason to do it. Well, they have a very good reason to do it. The uncertainty is destroying their business.
That's kind of an interesting point. So what's Mt. Gox down to? Like 50%, 55% of volume at this point? I know that the number has continued to go down over the last couple of months.
They tout that 80% in 2011, but yeah, I think it's near 50% now, or maybe even less.
So are we seeing the slow motion car crash that is Mt. Gox come to, its inevitable conclusion? Or do we think that this is just a bump in the road and, as soon as they fix whatever this current problem is, according to Roger's statement, the legacy banking system just simply isn't playing ball with them and isn't delivering at a level that is sufficient to meet demand? Do we think that they're just going to bounce back? I
really hope for the sake of Bitcoin that they are not insolvent. This gives me a little more confidence. The statement gives a little more confidence that they do have the funds to back everything up, and they're just having problems with the legacy banking system. Yeah, sure. Okay. Maybe I could believe that. And I hope it's true for the sake of Bitcoin, because if there was some kind of a scandal where they were insolvent, then, well, I was going to say it could be a real blow to Bitcoin, like people's confidence in it. But then again, maybe it just shows that Bitcoin is great because insolvency and fractional reserve banking are problems of the legacy banking system. If we move away from these kind of centralized exchanges and we go to more decentralized kinds of exchanges, then maybe those wouldn't be a problem. And that is possible with Bitcoin, whereas it's not possible in the legacy system. So maybe it could go either way. I'm not sure about that.
Mt. Gox doesn't have an insolvency problem, just like before it didn't have an account freeze problem, and before that it didn't have a DDoS problem, and before that it didn't have a trade lag latency problem, and before that it didn't have a trade engine problem. What Mt. Gox has had consistently is an inability to communicate about these things that has harmed them again and again and again, because they leave their customers in the dark and the customers assume the absolute worst. As a result, it keeps hurting their ability to support the volume. So if you look at this as individual isolated incidents over a 2-year period, it's one thing. But if you look at them as a continuous failure to communicate effectively with their customers, you see the same problem of trust and transparency gradually eroding their business.
One of the other things I think would be kind of interesting to see is in a future where really any exchange fails from insolvency, but it would be especially poignant if it was Mt. Gox. Should that happen, you can totally see how this would instill in the mind of the community such a skepticism about these financial institutions that are dealing in the Bitcoin space that I think you might have a real compelling reason suddenly to demand that type of transparency we were talking about previously that, to this point hasn't really been required and so hasn't been offered.
Mt. Gox is running the most transparent exchange in history. All of their public relations releases are classified. And you have no standing to read them.
I read something in Wired magazine that I was pretty disturbed about. Andreas, I'm going to call upon you to get your expertise on security and cryptography and encryption and stuff. But basically some new standard that's come out for encryption. Well, maybe it's not that new. It's maybe about a year old, but there was a standard that came out for encryption, and the standard is set by the government, by the National Security Agency or something like that.
It's new NIST standards, the National Institute of Science and Technology, and these standards have been proposed by the NSA, which has a very active role in defining cryptography standards for the government that eventually become adopted by everybody else.
Thank you for clarifying that, Andreas.
No worries.
So basically these standards come from the government. So they have a lot of control over them, right? And also these standards end up determining a lot of cryptographic applications for things like encryption keys, authentication, and all kinds of security applications. Apparently, in this new standard, there might be some kind of a backdoor for the NSA to be able to easily break these encryption codes. And if so, that's a huge problem because, you know, part of the reason why people want security is to be secure from the prying eyes of the government. This article becomes really relevant in the wake of the recent revelations about the extent of the NSA spying on Americans, the PRISM scandal and everything with these huge companies that are just basically handing over people's data to the government. I think this is a real cause for concern. So what do you think about this, Andreas? Did you read this about the back door? Do you think it's legit? Do you think there really is a back door for the NSA to be able to get in and easily break basically any kind of encryption?
This is limited to a very specific algorithm. For those who don't know, Bruce Schneier is a hero of cryptographers. He's a very well-known, world-renowned cryptographer. He's now on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, joined recently. He writes some of the most insightful security commentary on the TSA and encryption, and he's also designed several very important encryption algorithms like Blowfish and Twofish that are used extensively in encryption protocols. So Bruce knows his encryption inside and out, and he's one of the people who both submits proposals for new encryption standards to the NSA competitions, as well as reviews them and judges some of the results. And so what he's saying is that in one of the newness standards, the random number generator has been weakened by design. Essentially, this isn't a backdoor in a traditional sense of, you know, if you type the secret password, you can get in. It's potentially a deliberate weakness engineered into the random number generator to somehow make the outcome less random and therefore allow an agency with enough computing power to get a foothold into the seat of encryption. I'm not too concerned about this particular one because it's not going to get used as much, especially after this revelation. It does show the overall weakness of our information systems. If this one doesn't have an engineered weakness in it, you know, we already do know that SSL has a couple of engineered weaknesses in it, especially as regards forward secrecy. So, you know, it wouldn't surprise me at all if things that we consider encrypted are actually breakable. Now, the one good piece of news is that these algorithms are recommended for government use. So when NIST says this algorithm is good and it can be adopted, and when the NSA approves it, that means the government can use it for classified information. So they end up using it. So generally speaking, the NSA errs on the side of creating very, very strong encryption because once this is approved, it's used by government agencies at all levels. And therefore, they want that to be secure. In fact, that's the good work the National Security Agency does. And if only they spend more time helping us encrypt and secure our national infrastructure against everybody else who's spying, that would be great. So I'm a bit torn here. You know, I don't know if there is a weakness in here, but for sure I would follow the advice from Bruce Schneier. He's very well respected and basically not use that algorithm. There's no reason to. It's actually slower too.
You know, with all of these recent security revelations, the question that kind of always comes to my mind is, okay, so if these things are happening, does it actually matter to me? Is my life any different? Do I need to do anything differently? Or are there any precautions that I should be taking? I mean, like, or is this something where this affects a very small group of people, but broadly speaking is bad for the ecosystem because it introduces these vulnerabilities?
It's absolutely terrible for the security of everyone because what it means is that, you know, keep in mind, the NSA isn't the only one spying on us. So it basically exposes our information to more and more actors who have different motivations. So it makes everybody insecure. You know, the bottom line is choose the best security tools you can and apply them consistently, but don't hope that the NSA is the one you're thwarting. You may be thwarting everybody else who's trying to eavesdrop on you. It's not just one adversary. You know, when you're dealing with information security, you're dealing with all possible adversaries out there, private and public, who may have all kinds of motivation for going after your data, from, you know, a disgruntled employee to a jealous spouse to a vindictive government. It could be any of the above. So, you know, use good security operation.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you a small amount here, Andreas, because, when these revelations started coming out, when the Snowden thing started happening, we had a conversation about if there was a point in using something like CryptoCat or if there was a point in encrypting emails or things like that. And basically what you told me is that there is no security, nothing is secure, and, you can do whatever you want, but it's basically just making yourself feel better because everything is insecure. So is the part that I'm missing that there are like different levels of insecurity, and the
right.
NSA level is the highest level, but then below that there are things you need to protect yourself against?
Right, exactly. I mean, the issue here is that if you expect encryption will shield you from continuous and ubiquitous surveillance from the government, that's not going to help you. Not only does the government look at 3 degrees of separation between you and everybody else, which is pretty much everybody on the internet, but also they flag encrypted content specially and then keep it forever so that when and if they can break it in the future, they will. And they flag it for extra scrutiny. So using encryption in a very defensive kind of reactive way to thwart that particular type of surveillance is probably a waste of time. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't use, I use encryption and I use operational security to protect against eavesdropping from anyone. And I don't assume the government is the only one. So yeah, it is absolutely a matter of degrees of security. There is no such thing as secure versus not secure. It's all a matter of degrees. The answer for the NSA is to defund them, not to encrypt. We need to shut this machine down and then also encrypt and protect ourselves.
I'm curious, how does this affect Bitcoin? Or does it affect Bitcoin? Or is it just about cryptography in general?
Well, this is about a random number generator, so I don't think specifically it impacts Bitcoin.
Well, it could. So I have a particular interest in this because one of the projects that I'm involved in, which is Open Paper Wallet, actually does key generation. And a big concern for the customers and users of that product is, have we somehow compromised the random number generator that's used to generate the keys to weaken it, to erode its security or its randomness and make it more predictable? And that's a valid concern, which is why we take extra care to highlight that piece of code and not modify it in any way. So it matters because the Bitcoin keys, or if you like, the encryption keys, are not actually part of Bitcoin. They're generated outside of Bitcoin and they're used outside of Bitcoin itself. How you generate your keys varies and differs from application to application. So if you had an application that used a poor choice for a random number generator, you'd be in trouble. I would be much more worried about your application using a rather weak pseudo number generator based on a software library that's available to their application language of choice, rather than the fact that they picked an NSA compromised random number generator. They're more likely you're going to end up with just a poor choice of random number generator, one that's not inherently secure anyway. And then you don't need to worry about the NSA weakening it. It was weak to start with. There's a fantastic Dilbert clip where he's introduced to the cryptographic random number generator demon. There's this little monster sitting in front of a desk. And as they walk in, the demon goes, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. And as they walk away, the Dilbert goes, well, that didn't seem very random to me. and the other little demon goes, oh, well, we just walked in on him at a bad time, or something like that. And it's really fascinating because it's absolutely true. There's really no way to prove that something is or is not random unless you observe it over a very long period of time and statistically analyze it. So it may be that when you walk into the random number generator, in fact, 99999 is the random sequence. In the history of the universe, at some point, a random number generator is going to give you the same number 6 times in a row. That's random. But of course, you can't tell without the context. And that's the problem with these random number generators. You never know how good they are unless you analyze them over very long periods of time.
Let's Talk Bitcoin is heard each week by thousands of people who are participating in the new digital economy. Our listener base of Bitcoin owners, miners, investors, technologists, and merchants is growing fast. We offer a limited number of short advertising slots in each show to keep our listeners engaged and to provide maximum impact for our sponsors. If you'd like to talk to us about Let's Talk Bitcoin, send us an email at sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news. It's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.
On episode 18 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, we talked about the potential for Bitcoin in Kenya and eventually came to the conclusion that the folks with power in the system who could enable Bitcoin because of transaction fees and integrated government taxation are also those with the most to lose from that happening. Pele Brangard is a man with a vision, co-founder of the global wallet service Cappucci. He joins the show from Nairobi. Pele, what on earth are you doing in Kenya?
Well, Kenya is one of the most interesting places in the world right now when it comes to electronic money. It's obviously in Africa, and most people think Africa is really primitive. And yes, it has been in the past, but Kenya has a very interesting mobile money service called M-Pesa, and there are several competitors here as well. They're very widely used. People understand it. So that alone makes it very interesting to be here for Bitcoin, because people understand Bitcoin fairly instinctively, even if they haven't necessarily heard of it before. But it's not like a great jump as it is in, for example, California or Denmark.
So what is Cappucci? How does that work?
Well, Cappucci is a very simple wallet. We call it a mobile wallet because it's designed to work on a phone. Cappucci is a mobile web wallet. It's designed to make it very easy for regular users to use Bitcoin. We're not designed for hardcore Bitcoin users. We don't store the full blockchain on the phone, and we try and hide some of the more complicated terms within Bitcoin. Like, we don't really mention the blockchain. We prefer using phone numbers instead of addresses. We use millibitcoin and shorter transaction IDs. Some of those things may sound bad for Bitcoin purists, but that's what we need to do to bring it out to a wider audience.
Why is that? What is the advantage of doing those? Why were those decisions that you made?
They fit better into what people are used to. We've tried really hard to make it similar to what people are already used to with mobile money systems down here. Particularly the phone number is key here because people are used to that, to sending money to a phone number. I mean, our system obviously supports sending money to an address. It's just very hard to enter an address on a phone. Yes, you could do QR codes if you have an Android app, but most of our users aren't going to have Android phones. So we need to make it very simple.
If the address is attached to the phone number, are any of your users, do you see a use case with your product that involves privacy or anonymity, or is this all about convenience and all about trying to enable commerce rather than about some of the things we focus on more in the Western world?
It's really about making it convenient for the end users right now. And there are certain privacy issues, obviously, having a phone number mapped to an address. We are looking at various ways of improving that, but for now, we think that's a minor issue. We may be wrong with that, I have to say, but we are looking at ways to improve that.
Well, compared to M-Pesa, which is, again, one of the systems that you're competing with there, is that something like, is there any sort of anonymity or privacy implications there? Because it seems like with that type of system, there wouldn't be. So you're not really competing against anything else. It's just this is a competing service that has less fees. Is that the basic pitch?
We're not really competing with M-Pesa. M-Pesa, it's hard to compete with here. It's not really our target competitor. What M-Pesa doesn't do is that it doesn't do international payments, and it's not all that good for doing commerce transactions, like web commerce transactions. You can use M-Pesa to buy things in a shop. It's a little bit harder to buy things online with it, even though you can do so. So that's really where we're targeting. In Kenya itself, we're mainly looking at our service as being a complement to M-Pesa, as opposed to direct competitor.
So what's the response been from new users on the ground who are actually getting this in their hands for the first time?
People are quite excited about it, particularly people who have friends and families abroad. Down here, it's not just the traditional money coming down from the rich countries to here, but Kenya is in the region a fairly rich country, so there are a lot of immigrants as well here. So there's actually a lot of outflow as well. It's still early days, so I can't really see specific numbers and flows and trends yet, but most people that have used it really like it, find it very easy to use, and they like the fact that it looks and feels fairly similar to M-Pesa.
One of the concerns that we had when we were talking about this is the idea that because the Kenyan government is taxing M-Pesa transactions, I know you said that you're not competing with Safaricom, but the reality is that you're providing some kind of similar services. Then there's overlap there. So if people started to switch en masse to your product versus Safaricom, that would be to the detriment of the tax base as far as the government has it set up right now. Have you had any contact with the government? I mean, do you have any sort of read on if this is a concern or if, it's just something that we're blowing out of proportion hypothetically?
I think it will be a concern in the future. We haven't been directly in contact with the government yet on this. We are going to start reaching out to them and explaining to them what Bitcoin is and how it works. We understand, for example, if they feel the need to tax exchange transactions within Kenya, which they're pretty much within their right to do. But Bitcoin transactions themselves are harder and a different beast. So we hope to reach out with them and teach them about how Bitcoin works to avoid those kinds of issues.
If when you talk to the government, they say, we want to be able to tax this, is there any sort of mechanism by which you can enable that? Is that something that you would even consider? Is that just completely off the table and, they can ask, but there's nothing we can do?
We don't think that they can tax the actual Bitcoin transactions themselves. An exchange transaction with an established local exchanger or something that goes through, say, M-Pesa will be taxed somehow, probably in the future, if not already. I mean, if it's done via M-Pesa, the transaction is already taxed. I don't see that happening directly, but we would definitely be open for talks with them and explain what is and is not possible using the technology, if it comes to that.
I'd like you to respond to this statement I'm about to make. Bitcoin will see mass adoption last in the Western world. Bitcoin broadly is for the other 6.5 billion.
I agree with that completely. There's a much greater need for Bitcoin outside the West. As such, it's definitely going to grow here. I also personally think that Kenya is not necessarily the place where we're going to see largest growth of Bitcoin because there is already a good viable alternative called M-Pesa. So I don't see Bitcoin being huge in Kenya itself. Other countries in Africa, oh, absolutely.
This is a new product that you've launched. So did you launch in Kenya with the idea that because there's already this understanding, even though you can't capture all of the market, you'll at least have an easier time integrating and then from there you can grow? Or are you in a bunch of other countries as well as Kenya and that's just the one that I'm choosing to focus on? What's the market rollout plan?
Well, Cappucci is it's on the web. It uses SMS for authenticating phones, etc. So really, we are anywhere in the world with internet and mobile phone service. That's pretty much everywhere. Our main focus is on Africa. There's only one country that we're actively blocking right now, and that's the US for regulatory reasons.
Okay, I was going to ask about that. Yeah. The US is the only country that you're actually not servicing at this point.
Yes.
And so that's because you said regulatory. Is that because you don't know what the regulatory situation is going to be and you're just waiting to find out? Or what's the...
I moderated the regulatory panel at the San Jose conference, and I came away from it being even more worried about doing anything in the US than I was before. Basically, in the US, there is a $1 rule. There's also the rule that if you have any US-based customers, then you're covered by FinCEN rules. That is an issue for a international startup. The regulatory costs in the US were estimated by people who have and are doing it as being roughly $1 million before you can even take the first dollar transaction. So we don't want to affect our core market. And again, we're not that interested in the US market anyway. So it's just safer for us to protect our core markets, to just cut the US off. We may do something similar in other markets in the future. And if we can figure out a way of including the US in the future, we'll absolutely do so. But again, it's not priority for us.
So why are you actually in Kenya right now then? If it's not that Kenya is a specific focus, but rather that it's everywhere outside of the US that you view as the opportunity, why is Kenya the place to focus then?
Oh, Africa is my primary focus.
I see. So are you going around to other countries in Africa?
Yes, but as it is an internet service, we can actually target other countries using Google Ads and SEO, social media, etc. We will be doing that. I will be traveling around to other countries as well. There's been a lot of interest from South Africa and from Nigeria. Again, South Africa is a fairly developed economy, probably even more so than Kenya. So I'm not 100% sure what that market looks like, but we're letting it out there and people can use it. We're going to look at the usage and find out places that we should target specifically by me doing outreach, like traveling to these countries. I'll almost certainly be traveling to Nigeria over the next couple of months because that is a very interesting market for us.
So what's on the horizon? What are the next couple of things that you're working on?
Well, we're making the wallet free for everyone, and person-to-person transactions are going to be free as well, except for the Bitcoin network fee. We just want to have as many users on that as possible. We also, there's a technology called USSD, and it's kind of like a very simple web-like technology, except it uses SMS as the back end, and it works on every feature phone out there. So we have a product in testing. So far, it looks good. But the kicker for that is that we do need an agreement with phone operators to be able to offer that service. But we have that, and we are probably going to be rolling it out in the next week or two here in Kenya on one particular operator. And we hope to do so fairly soon. We believe we could probably roll it out in roughly 20 different countries here and reach a very large amount of users with even the most primitive feature phones. Secondly, well, the way we are going to make money is using a merchant platform that's specifically targeting, again, our target market, the developing world in Africa. That we will be rolling out in the next month or so.
One of the things that's been a little bit of a controversial issue in the Bitcoin community over the last couple of months is this idea of dust transactions, which is to say transactions that are below a couple of cents, where the transaction fee, because the fee is fixed at a minimum level, makes it so that the transactions are very expensive if they're microtransactions. This has been more of a problem in developing countries that have, a different value scale than we do here in the Western world. Is that something that you've run into as a concern? And is it anything to be concerned about? I
am quite concerned about it. I'm looking at different ways that we can batch transactions up somehow. There are different approaches that we could probably take using off-chain transactions, etc. It is a worry because that fee, which seems really small right now, is actually not that low for someone in the developing world. I am worried about it, and we are looking at ways of solving that. But I don't think the blockchain should be scared of these dust type of transactions because these kinds of transactions are really where I think the future growth is going to be.
This show is called Let's Talk Bitcoin. Kind of an interesting thing is, because you have this unevenness in what one culture needs from their money relative to another culture, you're going into areas where there's almost no Bitcoin penetration to start, right? So have you thought about using an altcoin or developing an altcoin that is specifically designed around this idea of microtransactions and then bootstrapping that into these communities that have no Bitcoin exposure already?
Early on, it was something I was considering, but I do think that it's better to use Bitcoin. There is a network effect with Bitcoin compared to other altcoins. And yes, we probably could bootstrap that up here, but we don't necessarily want to be the primary purveyor of transactions on an altcoin.
That makes sense.
That would make me worried about that particular altcoin. I don't want us to be in the situation where we are in charge of 50% of all the transactions.
Right.
That would kind of, defeat the purpose, I think.
It's not so much that Bitcoin already has name recognition in these places, but the fact that it has so many people using it around the world makes it so it's not about your company, it's about Bitcoin, as opposed to if you started your own alt and then it would be about your company.
Exactly.
Pele, if someone would like to use your software, if someone would like to get in touch with you to talk about your project, what are the means to do that?
Well, our service is at Cappucci.com. That's KIPOCHI.com. That means wallet in Swahili. So you can find us there. You can also tweet me directly at PeleB. That's PELLEB. Please feel free to contact me.
Pele, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for embarking on this project. This is really exciting. I was not expecting to see Bitcoin in Africa in a meaningful way, and it's really great that you're pushing this forward.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
There's been an exciting announcement about Satoshi Dice. I don't know if y'all have used Satoshi Dice, but it's a very, very popular Bitcoin game. And also the site that a lot of people blame for, quote, overloading the blockchain with small transactions because of the way that the game works. But there's been a major update about Satoshi Dice posted by Eric Voorhees, who is the now former owner. Dear asset holders, I have some very important news to share with you. Some of you will be pleased and some upset, but I believe this to be a solid, desirable, and fair outcome for those who have put their trust in Satoshi Dice. Satoshi Dice is being sold in full to a new company that will take over all ownership, operations, and management. The total sale price is 126,315 Bitcoins, or 0.001263 blah, blah, blah Bitcoins per share. And then they go on to talk about a few more details of this deal. But yeah, he's out. Satoshi Dice is in new hands right now. And it was sold for Bitcoins, and that's pretty cool.
Did Eric actually own Satoshi Dice? I thought that he was just like more of a spokesman, and I knew he worked with them, but I didn't realize he was actually the owner.
No, I think he did.
He was the full owner. Yeah. He was the majority owner.
Oh, well, congratulations to Eric.
Yeah, I'm really actually very excited for him. I mean, I do know Eric personally, not super well, but I know him enough to be really excited for him when, his business sold and he got to reap the benefits of entrepreneurship.
Let's look at this from an industry perspective. In the first 3 years of the Bitcoin ecosystem, we now have a company that has gone full cycle from investment to basic in Bitcoin IPO and share issuance, now to an exit, which is a very big deal, at between $8 and $11 million. That's the largest exit event in this industry. It's bigger than any investment we've seen in this industry. And it shows conclusively that there is a very interesting ROI path, an exit path for companies in the Bitcoin space. This is extremely good news. Even better that Eric sold this for Bitcoin, 112,000 or 120,000 Bitcoin, and presumably will keep this in Bitcoin. These facts are huge endorsements for investors interested in Bitcoin, for entrepreneurs building businesses who can see this as a great example of how to exit. And it couldn't be better news for the Bitcoin ecosystem. This is a very big deal.
120,000 Bitcoins sort of lends itself to some interesting questions. Do we think that this was sold to someone from outside the Bitcoin community, or that another early adopter like Eric in fact made this purchase? And if it was from outside the Bitcoin community, do we think that that could have accounted for some of the price increases we've seen over the last week or two?
I think that's all information that we should seek and find out. It would be very interesting to find out who the buyer is and how they managed to get 120,000 Bitcoin to buy it, whether the sale is going to be executed in one go. So we'll see. You're right. I mean, it is quite a lot of money to put into Bitcoin and move into the economy. It would have a noticeable effect on price.
Those aren't US-based companies. Where are they located?
Panama, with both Coinapult and Satoshi Dice, partially, at least because it's so hard to do business with Bitcoin businesses and particularly Bitcoin game businesses in the US. Panama is pretty much a more friendly regulatory environment. And so maybe it just drove him to the point where he really wanted to get out.
Well, I think that it sounded like he had an opportunity to. The question that I would have is, does this have any impact on Satoshi Dice moving forward? Because, Satoshi Dice, like you mentioned at the beginning of the segment, is one of those companies where some people like it and some people really like to hate it because it puts so many transactions onto the Bitcoin network. So without Eric at the helm, do we think that Satoshi Dice has a harder time doing that, has a harder time making that case?
Oh, I think all of those complainers should just suck it. I mean, really, this is a very successful exit for a very successful Bitcoin business, and the rest is crying over sour grapes because they didn't make the same success that Eric did. Now, what I'd be really interested in seeing is whether Eric is going to take all 126,000 Bitcoins and place one massive Satoshi Dice bet with that money. On a 50-50 spread. That would be legendary.
We'll be watching this one. I'm curious to see how Satoshi Dice develops over time, because again, that'll be the next question, is what happens after one of these main sales happens, where, a pillar of the Bitcoin community steps away from one of these projects and it goes into new hands. Does it retain its same prominence? I mean, the story is interesting now. It'll be more interesting in 6 months once we see what happens.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin, the premier audiocast providing news and insights that cover the rapidly evolving world of digital money. Our twice-weekly shows include analysis of late-breaking news, updates on key technical, business, and regulatory issues, and in-depth interviews with the key people driving the new digital economy. Let's Talk Bitcoin offers sponsors an attractive way to reach a targeted and savvy audience. For more information, email sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB.
Exciting things are happening in Argentina. Less exciting for the people who actually live in Argentina because these are difficult times, but exciting things for Bitcoin nevertheless, and hopefully an exit valve for people living in Argentina. So if you haven't heard, I guess over the last 30 years, most of Latin America has been having currency problems, but especially over the last couple of years, things have been very difficult in Argentina. There's been very, very heavy inflation, very heavy currency controls. And for many Argentinians, after years of experience with this, they've got a lot of their money abroad. So doing any significant transactions in Argentina involves moving money back and forth. Up to recently, one of the tricks that companies used was to buy stock in Buenos Aires that's listed in the Argentinian stock exchange and then sell that stock that's also listed in the New York stock exchange for dollars, essentially transferring stock instead of currency. Well, that was banned 2 days ago. One more nail, if you like, in the coffin of currency controls and the Argentinian money, as more currency controls just increase the panic. And in all of this, you've got the one exit valve or leaf valve of Bitcoin. Kaiser recently called it the Red Cross of currencies. You have a crisis, here comes Bitcoin. Disaster relief from the Red Cross of currencies. I kind of like that idea. I think in the last week, we've seen a tripling of the downloads of the official Satoshi client from Argentina, as well as a lot more news about Bitcoin in Argentina. What do you guys think?
The value of Bitcoin to Argentinians really shows because of the attitudes, which we'll talk about in a minute. It could be the thing that just saves, places like Argentina where there are strict currency controls and they're doing everything they can to try to sort of stop the bleeding, but it's just not working. Now, I don't know if you want to talk about this right now, but as I alluded to just a moment ago, there was a recent survey about attitudes about Bitcoin and whether people trust Bitcoin and whether they trust it compared to their local currency. Argentina was actually the most trusting country that was surveyed in this study. So the statistics from this survey were pretty surprising. Bitcoin awareness in Argentina, almost 37.9% of people knew what Bitcoin was. And out of the people who knew what Bitcoin was in Argentina, about half trusted it as much or more than their local currency. So that's pretty good. If they know what it is, they're likely to trust it.
Andreas, I think this is the point that you keep coming back to, when we talk about the other 6.5 billion. The reasons why someone would want to use Bitcoin and the reason why someone would want to use cryptocurrencies in general are much more apparent if your local currency that you have to deal with every day is a total basket case, which I think can pretty well describe what's going on in Argentina.
Trust in Bitcoin is inversely correlated to trust in the local currency and the local government. And in the case of Argentina, both have pretty much zero trust right now. People can't depend on their currency as a store of value. It is eroding so fast that effectively anyone who can gets their money out. Anyone who's getting paid paycheck to paycheck essentially is seeing their paychecks shrink over time and their purchasing power reduced. So this is the main, I think, topic that would be really worth understanding from an American perspective is that our situation is unique here. We have the privilege of being in a country that has the world reserve currency, that no one else gets that privilege. Comparatively, a relatively stable currency. I think it's inflated, manipulated, and in serious trouble. But compared to the Argentinian money, it's great. There will always be more utility, perceived and actual, between Bitcoin and other currencies than between Bitcoin and the dollar. It's always going to be harder to persuade someone here than it will be to persuade someone in Argentina. I think Argentina may well become the first national tipping point for Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because it combines the prerequisites. You have a really seriously problematic local currency, so the utility is obvious. You have the technology in place in terms of telecommunications infrastructure, computers, internet, education level in the country, computer literacy, etc. People don't get shot for owning Bitcoin, so there's no element of fear. People are accustomed to playing with currencies because they have to. All of these things really point to the possibility of very rapid, sudden adoption of Bitcoin in that environment. And we could see that tipping point happen sooner rather than later.
You know, one of the most interesting parts to me about all of this is that this is not the first time that a country has done this, you know, where they put on capital controls. Because again, the point of capital controls is to try and mandate that people use a currency that otherwise they don't trust to use. So the way that you accomplish that is you say, okay, well, people have to use money. So if we eliminate all of the other options, then they'll have no choice but to just use this currency that they might not trust. But, you know, it's better than not using any currency at all. And so cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin specifically enter the situation with a meaningful advantage, both in terms of being a stateless currency, but also just being better than whatever the local alternative is, in much the same way that email is just better than standard snail mail by every sort of metric that you can measure it by that actually matters. You know, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's less resistant to tampering, it's more private. It's, you know, I mean, you can go down the list. There are a lot of things that make it advantageous. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it would be I'll be very interested to see if we do see a rush of adoption, and more importantly, what type of response we get from the Argentinian government should something like that happen. Because I mean, you're saying that this might be the first country tipping point, but I think it might be the first country tipping point the other way. This might be the first place we see Bitcoin attempted to be banned.
I think both are equally likely, and possibly both will happen simultaneously. It's not really one or the other. Bitcoin may be broadly adopted unbanned at the same time. Keep in mind that for many of the people who are rich in Argentina, they don't keep their money in Argentina. They have their money in the US, primarily in dollars. So at the moment, if you want to buy or sell an apartment, or if you want to do a real estate business, or you want to do a big export trade or something like that, most of your financial activities are occurring outside the country in dollars. It's a lot easier to buy that Bitcoin with dollars from outside the country. The Argentinian government doesn't really have much control. And this is what's fascinating with Bitcoin, because up to now, all of these mechanisms for currency controls could keep the vast majority of the population locked into a currency long enough to suffer the crisis together and emerge from it in whatever shape they emerge. But now, for some part of that population, and it's not just the rich this time, it's more sort of the technorati, they have an exit valve, they have an exit plan. And so Bitcoin represents an opportunity for them to say, look, you know, I understand why you want to keep that currency and keep everyone in it, but I'm opting out. See ya.
We talked kind of broadly about how there are capital controls, but we didn't actually talk about what happened. And I think it's worth talking about this because Argentina has a history of introducing new types of currencies. When you look at what they're doing now with a certificate of deposit for investment, it almost is like a new currency unto itself. And so from that perspective, Bitcoin has substantially more reputation than even the locally enforced and you must use this currency has, just because it has a longer track record. I mean, what do you think of this type of financial innovation coming straight from governments? Do you think it has any sort of legitimacy with the people who actually are forced to deal with it, or it's just another thing that's being piled on?
They've seen this again and again and again. You know, a lot of Latin American countries have gone through 6 or 7 currencies in the last 30 years, all of which have followed the exact same fate. Because of imbalances, trade imbalances and capital imbalances, they eventually get inflated into nothingness. I think it's really interesting how training your citizens to be comfortable with switching to a new currency again and again over a short period of time within a generation makes it more likely, now that there is a cryptocurrency, that they will simply just run with it. You know, and
it's ironic. Yeah,
it's very ironic, right? It would be very difficult to do that here, where for the last 4 generations, at least or more, the US dollar has been dominant in daily life. And therefore there is no, just even conceiving how you would do a broad societal change of currency is very difficult to imagine. I've been through one. I've been through a devaluation in Greece that was massive and involved issuing new currency notes. I remember kind of the overnight, by this date, get all your deposits in and then go get new money and everybody stands in line at the bank, etc. In Latin America, they've done this several times. So yeah, train them. Keep training them.
It is to a much lesser degree, but in the US, a lot of people are familiar, even though we've had the dollar for so long and it's been relatively stable. It has devalued a lot. I mean, I've seen these memes go around online that compare purchasing power of a dollar in 1913 to that in 2013, and it's lost like 96% of its value. And it's very common when you talk to older people in the US that they'll say, oh, I remember, wait, let me put on my old person voice. I remember when you could buy candy for 10 cents and you could go to the movies for 5, So it's obvious that the dollar has been devaluing over time, even if it's kind of too slow to maybe notice in a year or a couple of months. You definitely notice over a couple of years. I mean, I've noticed it over my lifetime for sure. And I think it's interesting because this survey that I mentioned a little bit earlier not only surveyed Argentinians about their attitudes on Bitcoin, but also people from the US and also British people. Those are 2 countries where I guess we think of the currency as being relatively stable. So what were their attitudes about Bitcoin? Well, they actually weren't far behind Argentina. I mean, Argentina was the most Bitcoin aware, with 37% of people knew what Bitcoin was. In the UK, 32% knew what it was. And in the US, 25% knew what it was. All of them had more than half of people who were aware of Bitcoin that trusted it as much or more than their local currency. Even when a local currency is stable enough, in quotes, and of course there's varying degrees of that, right, from huge instability to kind of very subtle, insidious gnawing away at the value of the currency, still people trust Bitcoin.
I don't know if it's necessarily such a great sign for Bitcoin as it is a sign that people don't trust the money that they're using now. I mean, that certainly was true for me. So it's all kind of relative.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's all relative. I'll put my old person's voice on and recount one of my memories from my father discussing his childhood. And he said, yeah, I remember when the Gestapo took away my uncle. That week we had to eat the donkey. I kid you not. It's all a matter of perspective. My father's generation remembers, and my father specifically remembers eating donkey during the Great Famine during the Second World War when the Gestapo had taken over the village and were killing people left, right, and center. So, if you look back at generational experiences, this is why I say this matters more to the rest of the world, because for the rest of the world, currency horrors, the horrors of currency, the horrors of war, the horrors of extreme poverty are 1 generation away. Not 5, not 10, not 15.
And on that positive note, we're just about out of topics for this week. But, Andres, I think that's a really good point to make. The relative nature of history is just crazy. Things can change so fast, and when you're in the middle of it, it's very difficult to tell what's going on. It's very difficult to say this is going to be a pivotal moment because you don't know. It's just what you're living right now. It's only in hindsight looking back that you can say, oh, wow, that was something that really mattered and that really changed the world. It just makes me wonder where we're going with all of this, because there are so many variables in play, so many different things that governments can do, so many different things. I mean, there's a lot of concern we've been talking about centralization lately. There are just so many different ways. I just wonder where we're going to be in a couple of years, what we're going to think about this time then.
Well, one of the things that keeps me always optimistic, the very best laid plans of either the Bitcoin community or those who are adversaries to the Bitcoin community will be laid dust by a black swan that could come at any moment. Black swan is a term introduced by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is an author, and he wrote a book about how our capability of predicting the future is massively limited, because what we don't expect is the things that don't match any of the known patterns. In 18th century England, people had never seen a black swan. They never assumed that such a thing could exist. So the first one was completely unexpected. And now we know that that's part of the pattern of swans. But The point being that you can have tremendous upheaval and change and rapid change. And 5 years ago, Bitcoin didn't exist. Bitcoin is a black swan, and there will be others. At some level, that keeps me optimistic. The uncertainty cuts both ways.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Whether you liked, loved, or hated the show, we want to know what you think. Please send all listener mail to adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. Content for this episode was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas Amantonopoulos, and Pelly Brandgard. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens. If you like what we're doing and want to support us with Bitcoin or Litecoin donations, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com for episode-specific addresses. If you've got a question you'd like answered on air, call us at 1-855-WE-TALK-BITCOIN. Stay tuned for episode 27 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, releasing Friday the 26th of July. Thanks for listening.